Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We welcome you all to our 29th COZ event. This is going to be truly a very special event. We're glad that you can all join us. A big thanks as always to Geraldine Auerbach for helping us keep organized, and to Dr. Lori Black, and to some of our students at UCLA, to Eva, to Joanna for helping make everything work. So today's program is going to be quite an interesting program, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce two very interesting people. The first is the very young retired Cantor and Rabbi Baruch Cohon, who has been a mainstay in Los Angeles. He has many creative parts to him. He's a writer, he's a composer, he's a performer, and just a very wonderful force. And part of the very interesting part of his background growing up in Cincinnati is that he was a student of AZ Idelsohn and studied with him at the age of 5, which I'm sure we'll hear more about. His relationship with AZ Idelsohn, and Baruch Cohon has also done some very interesting publications. We will also be joined by Jonathan Morgan, a clinical psychologist and a writer in Cape Town, South Africa, who is the great-grandson of AZ Idelsohn, and he recently published a book, which we'll be hearing more about, called Nigun, a historical fictional biography about AZ Idelsohn. And Jonathan, to let you know, you have an attentive group of adoring Idelsohn fans, because to us, you're the closest thing that we have to Idelsohn royalty. So we welcome Rabbi Cantor Baruch Goldstein, Dr. Jonathan Morgan, and look forward to a wonderful session. Baruch, you'll need to unmute yourself. You're still muted. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Sam.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, good. All right. We'd like to start by asking everybody a question. What is the best known Jewish song in the world? Anybody want to name it?
Hava Nagila. How about that?
You got it.
Hava Nagila.
Unquestionably, the best known Jewish song in the world. So now let's find out where it came from. What I'd like to start with is the story of the man who had something to do with it. He was born in 1882 in Latvia, and he researched the multiple varieties of Jewish music and made its story available to the world. His name was Abraham Tzvi Idelsohn. His work is remembered in countless ways throughout the worlds of music and of Judaism, and particularly treasured by those who knew him. I am grateful to be one of those. I wrote a chapter in his honor in this little book of mine, Making Sense of a Century, and I am glad to honor his memory. What happened here, what did he have to do with Hava Nagila? It's very simple. While he was following his dream and building his musical treasury, World War I broke out. He was in Jerusalem then, and as you know, in those days, Jerusalem and the whole Eretz Israel was part of the Turkish Empire. And sure enough, Idelsohn was drafted in the Turkish army. He had to lead a band, an army band in Gaza, but that was just his daytime job. In the evening, he had to sing Schubert Lieder to entertain the officers. Well, with his help, Turkey lost the war. And 1918 found Idelsohn back in Jerusalem, teaching in the fledgling Hebrew schools of the time and conducting a chorus to supplement his meager income. They planned a victory concert. After all, the Turks were out, the British were in, there was a Balfour Declaration recognizing a Jewish homeland. Let's sing about it. Rehearsals were going well, but Idelsohn realized he had no grand finale, no ending song that would grab the audience, but he had a file. So he went to his file, and as if guided by destiny, he picked out a Hasidic tune from the rabbinical court of Sadegora, a wordless bim-bam with a catchy melody. He added some simple Hebrew lyrics, come and rejoice, awake brothers with a happy heart. He arranged the song in 4 parts and made it the concert's finale. By his own account, it was quite effective. He published that song in several places. For one thing, he wrote a 10-volume thesaurus of Hebrew Oriental melodies. And this tune appears in 2 of them. In volume 10, the Songs of the Hasidim, he put the original version with no lyrics, just a melody. And in volume 9, which was the folk song of the Eastern European Jews, he printed the song with his arrangement and his lyrics. And this is what he wrote about it. He said, "The song may serve as an example of how a song becomes a popular folk song. This tune originated at the court in Sadegora, that's in Bukovina area, and was brought to Jerusalem. In 1915, I wrote it down. In 1918, I needed a popular tune for a performance of my mixed choir in Jerusalem, and my choice fell upon this tune, which I arranged in 4 parts, and for which I wrote a Hebrew text. The choir sang it, and it apparently caught the imagination of the people. For the next day, men and women were singing the song throughout Jerusalem. In no time, it spread throughout the country, and thence throughout the Jewish world. Today, as you just told me, it is still the best known Jewish song in the world." Well, he published it in various places, including in 1922, his Sefer HaShirim, a book of songs for kids, and he has that in here. As you see, the music is printed from right to left to go along with the Hebrew lyrics. I doubt if they still publish music in Israel that way, but that's the way they did at that time. I'd like to show you some of his other works. The same year, 1922, his opera, Jephthah, Yiftach, was performed in Israel. And then he had others as he made his way to the new country. He wrote songs with English lyrics. Here's a wedding song called Set Me as a Seal, based on a verse from the Shir HaShirim. And he wrote monographs of all kinds of music. He has one on the Kol Nidre tune. He has one on the Mogenovos mode. He has a whole catalog published by Yuval. This is they put out an Abraham Tzvi Idelsohn Memorial Volume, Yuval in Jerusalem. These dates from 1928 to 1932, and here's one, a postmortem publication called A Peerless Musicologist Remembered by Edgar Siskin, and that's dated 1989. And here is the current monograph series, a catalog from the Hebrew University of Idelsohn's works, and that's his picture. I'll get to my own personal connection with Idelsohn later, but we're fortunate to have with us now a man who has a unique heritage. He's the great-grandson of AZ Idelsohn, and my pleasure now to turn to him. From South Africa, Jonathan Morgan.
Thank you very much, Baruch. Thank you, all of you. Thanks, Geraldine. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here today and to be able to share my work. I'm going to be talking about this, which is a book that I only finished writing and was published in the last month or two. It's available on Kindle, Amazon, and it's called Nigun, the story behind Aguila. And it's based on dedicated to the life and work of Avraham Tzvi Idelsohn. And I'll just clarify that it's it's not a biography in a very sort of third person kind of biography. It's written in the first person. So you hear, I know you in America say AZ, we say AZ, but it's AZ's own voice. He wrote a very short autobiographical sketch, probably about 5 pages long. And I tried to keep alive that same tone and the same voice that came through. And so the whole book is in his voice, as well as there's perspectives from his daughters, Shoshana and Yiska. So what I'd like to do is, first of all, I wanted to welcome AZ himself. This is a memory box. And I'll just step back a little bit. It's a box which is like those babushka dolls. And it's a box within a box within a box. So if you open it up, excuse me a second, you'll see there's another box within the box. And this is our family history, but it's because this is a photo of AZ. He's sitting in, I believe it's on a Florida beach with his wife Zilla. And so I just wanted to invoke his presence in this special meeting. So if you don't mind now, I'm going to just read you some excerpts from the book. And I will please continue with the chats and I'll try to keep an eye on them. And if I respond, so it's not boring, just like me reading all the time, we'll break it up with some dialogue. Okay, so I am not sure if I'm still screen sharing, am I? No, share screen, there we go. There we go. Okay, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Great. So this is the title, Nigun, the story behind Aguila. And I'm going to read you the sort of blurb which appears on the back cover. And it says, Nigun, this is the backstory to Aguila and much, much more. From the 15th century to the 19th century in Eastern Europe, there existed itinerant boy chazanim called singers, meshorerim, who were apprenticed to a more experienced older chazan. These boys learned their trade by accompanying their teacher, traveling from village to village and town to town, singing and performing in shuls and public places. These traveling chazanim were much like the troubadours, poet musicians, minstrels, and bards of old. The hero of the story, Avram, is such a boy. He begins his career as a legendary Jewish ethnomusicologist when at the age of 5, he learns and collects Hasidic tunes, nigunim in Latvia and Lithuania to sing to and with his teacher and his father. AZ's life and his work span the yeshivot and shtetls of Eastern Europe and the cities of Berlin, Leipzig, Johannesburg, and Jerusalem. His life's work was to record using the emerging phonograph recording technology and to analyze the sacred songs of Jews who had returned to Israel from the diaspora around the turn of the 20th century. The music he collected in Jerusalem was that of the Sephardic Jews, the Ashkenazim, the Syrians, the Persians, the Kurds, the North Africans, the Yemenites, and the Poles. His project was to discover Jewish synagogue music as it was performed and sounded like in biblical times, free of the accretions of Western modernization, and to use this as a foundation for an old new musical style for the emerging Jewish state. So what we know about AZ is that he did have an apprentice with a chazan called Rabinovitz, and but we do not know that he was a traveling singer or meshorerim or traveling apprentice who had more than one teacher. This was very much a practice of the times, but that was slightly fictionalized part of the book. So the book is set as an old man telling his life story, and he introduces the Nigun as a central motif of the book. It is 1937, World War II is about to come. Avram Tzvi Idelsohn, with more gray than brown in his beard and partially paralyzed, sits in a sunlit room and hums a Nigun. Bim diddy bam bim bam. He then tells us, Nigun in Hebrew means tune or melody. Most often the Nigun has no words and only repetitive sounds instead of lyrics. Ay, 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 ay. Lyrics can only say one thing at a time. With sounds, you can say anything and everything. Melody is the outpouring of the soul, but words interrupt the stream of emotion. So that's just a bit from the very opening of the book. And then he goes on to explain his early relationship to Nigunim. From my father, I learned to love not only the Hasidic Nigunim, but also the synagogal modes and Zmiros, that is the Sabbath table songs, as well as Jewish folk songs. One of my early memories is father sitting me on his knee and intoning blessings upon the whole family and future generations. Father had a voice that sounded beautiful to me. He loved singing and had a very good musical memory, excellent for remembering melodies that he used to fit to the texts of the Zmiros, recycling them over the course of many hours on the Sabbath. At home, I received an Orthodox education and appreciation for everything Jewish. I too loved singing and was told that I was a quick learner. Now, this is a story that I learned from Rabbi Cohon, from Baruch, and it's a key part of the book, and that's why even this talk was something like the fish and the, I forgot it now, but it comes from him, from Rabbi Cohon about AZ. The fish in the market, a formative moment in the life of AZ. Avram, please run to the market and buy me a nice fresh fish for Sabbath meal, says his mother. I need a fresh fish, please, says AZ in the marketplace. Will this one do? Good, let me wrap it in newspaper. What is this writing on the newspaper, I asked. That, my boy, is neither Yiddish, nor Hebrew, nor Latvian, nor Lithuanian, nor Russian. It is music. Music? Music can be written down? I ran home, taking care not to drop the fish or the precious paper. Near my house, I nearly collided with a man carrying 2 buckets hanging from a yoke balanced across his shoulders. Abba, Emma, look at the writing on this newspaper. It is music. Music can be written down. Music can be written down. I want to study music. I want to learn with someone who knows how to read and write it. Baruch Hashem, said my father. Maybe becoming a rabbi is not for you. You do sing beautifully and you learn fast. Yes, you will become a great chazan. We will give you to Reb Rabinovitz. So he begins his apprenticeship with Reb Rabinovitz, and after some 6 months with Reb Rabinovitz, he told me that the town was no longer able to keep him in his permanent position as a chazan, and that we would have to travel from shtetl to shtetl, shul to shul in search of work. Wages I cannot pay you, Avram, but you can travel with me and eat with families in the communities we visit. At weddings and festival meals, you can have a collection plate. Erev Yom Kippur, you will receive many donations. We will begin with a smaller shtetl outside of Plotel. But if we grow famous, we may travel to Memel, Vilnius, Riga, and other big cities. So they begin touring the shtetl, and this subheading is performances didn't always go down so well. The next day was our day to perform in the shul. Reb Rabinovitz and I had been practicing on the back of the wagon the whole way on the journey and felt confident. After we had sung the same songs which the previous congregation had liked so much, we were approached by the rabbi. "You are not keeping up with the times," he admonished us. "In the cities, they now have organs in the shuls. At least one of you should be playing a harp, a violin, or a flute, and you should have more boys in your choir." Reb Rabinovitz said nothing, but I could see that he felt insulted and that he was angry. That evening, he found his tongue. "I'm not a performing monkey," he told me. Fellow travelers and shtetl scenes, Isaac Bashevis Singer. So obviously I'd never had the opportunity to visit a shtetl 100 years ago, and I relied heavily on the descriptions of famous Yiddish Hebrew writers like Isaac Bashevis Singer, who was my favorite. And sometimes you have AZ populating the scenes and meeting similar characters to those described in Isaac Bashevis Singer. And along the way, his teacher, his chazan, his rabbi, not his rabbi, but his teacher, Rebbe Rabinovitz, tells the young boy Fireside Tales. And these are when they're on the back of a wagon or over a meal in a barn or in the poorhouse. Rebbe Rabinovitz shares stories with AZ. And these are either scary ghost stories about diboks or golems, or they're tales of other legendary chazanim. For example, Yoel David Levinson, the child prodigy, Salomon Sulza, Nibelza, the chazan who lost his voice. Germanic Christian influence on shul music. After a service in the city, Rebbe Rabinovitz asks me, I just had a message that my internet connection is unstable, so please let me know if you can't hear. After a service in the city, Rebbe Rabinovitz asked me, "Nu, what did you think of Romkala?" It was like nothing I've ever heard before, I told him. I like the music and the singing, but I also miss the old tunes I know so well. Exactly, mein Kind. Granted, the organ, the musical instruments, and the full choir lent a certain power to the performance, but it was just that, a performance, a hodgepodge of Viennese operatic tunes, Protestant church hymnology and Beethoven, tunes with no relationship to Jewish prayer. The Hasidic Jewish simple flavor is missing. They have, as they say, thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Let us go find an old-style Hasidic shul for tomorrow's service. Jewish men without beards, women with hair and arms uncovered, Yiddish newspapers. I was confused by what I saw, and Rebbe Rabinovitz has told me. I felt safe and protected by the old ways, but also curious about the new. In the inn we stayed in, I found a pile of old Yiddish newspapers with stories in them, serialized stories about a Jewish detective translated from English into Yiddish, direct from Sir Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. But it was not set in London, but in Warsaw, complete with Jewish characters, Jewish thieves, and Jewish policemen. This was so different from reading the Talmud with the rabbinical commentaries. It was exciting for me, and I had to make sure that Rebbe Rabinovitz did not find me reading these stories. He had already warned me, telling me that if I did and he caught me, he would put peas in my boots and that I would forfeit my place in the world to come. He told me that the yeshiva boys caught reading these stories are expelled from the yeshiva. But what I read made me realize that there is another world out there, outside of the Torah and the Talmud and outside of the shtetl. He gets a new teacher to replace Rebbe Rabinovitz after some time. I had been with Rebbe Rabinovitz several years now. It was already a strong desire in me to graduate from being just a chazan singer to become a chazan in my own right. In order to learn what he needs to, a singer has to learn from more than one chazan. On my travels with Rebbe Rabinovitz, I had begun to look out for my next teacher. So this is Reb Eliyahu Kagan, who had expressed an interest in the young AZ as a singer in his choir. It was common practice then for musicians and chazans to swap or even steal each other's boys. And Reb Rabinovitz and I parted ways, and I began my new life with Reb Eliyahu. He was very different to Reb Rabinovitz. For one thing, he performed less in the smaller shtetls and was in demand in the larger towns and cities. He had no beard or earlocks, but he did keep his head covered at all times. Okay, I'm going to skip a little bit there. And then even after this teacher, he has a third teacher. And he says, well, I'll just tell you that this third teacher was a klezmer musician who was a married man, but he'd remove his ring when they entered a new shtetl, and he'd have affairs with the widows in the shtetls. And AZ was not impressed with him, but he learned a lot. And then just before my 17th birthday, I learned that in Leipzig, Germany, a cousin was sought for a new synagogue. I left the uncle whose bad habits also worried me. And he goes to Leipzig, and this is where he meets my great-grandmother, Zilla, who's the daughter of Hilalschneider. An old dream of mine was to study in the Leipzig Conservatorium, which I could now realize. The chief cantor of the synagogue in Leipzig was Hillel. He was influenced by the great Sulzer, but he was still a chassid at heart. He took me under his wing and invited me into his home. The synagogue that employed me was a smaller one in the same city. So at the age of 18, he offers AZ the hand of his daughter, Zilla, and they get married. And these are some of the big questions discussed by AZ and Hillel. Did the Jews preserve their original music during the years of exile, or did they abandon it for the music of the nations among whom they lived? What did Jewish music sound like in biblical times? How should Jewish music, shul music sound now? Where and how have we taken a wrong turn? What is essential? What is an accretion? Who were the greatest chazanim? What is the relationship between folk songs and shul songs? What about the use of instruments in shul? What do you think about the Jewish Enlightenment? So I'm going to pause there for a minute and give you an opportunity to comment or ask any questions, and then I will continue. I'm sorry, I can't see the chat. So if you have a comment or question, please just speak up.
Yeah, just unmute and say something if you want to. Robert Max, did you want to say something? Or Marsha?
I wanted to say something, Geraldine, please.
Yes, Alex.
I'd like to know, it seemed that these teachers we don't know much about, or there was not mentioned Reb Rabinowitz and so on and so forth. We know who Sulzer was, but can you tell us a little bit about who these teachers were and how different they were in the fact that they obviously influenced Idelsohn and in different ways because of the different type of teachers they were. But I don't know anything about Reb Rabinowitz or the other teachers. So can you sort of expand on this, please?
Thank you for the question. When AZ Idelsohn was 11 or 12 years old, his father apprenticed him to Reb Rabinowitz, who was sorry, I've just gone blank, in the town of, in Lithuania. Sorry, I've just forgotten the name of it. It was a seaport. He apprenticed the young AZ to Reb Rabinowitz, and as far as we know, he didn't have other teachers. He has other teachers later in his life. When he goes to Leipzig, his teacher is Hilalschneider. And so the book is fiction where we have him with a great variety of teachers of different persuasions, like I said, the klezmer musician, and the one who's in more part of the Enlightenment, who doesn't have a beard and payot, and he doesn't wear yarmulke all the time. So that is fiction, but I do have some information about Rabinowitz, which I can email to Geraldine, but I don't know very much about that. Okay, are there any other questions or comments?
Where did he get his general education?
He went to Cheder and to yeshiva, and after
In
that,
what town? What was the name of the town?
That's what I just went blank on.
I know. Okay.
With a bit of stage fright. So yeah, it will come to me, and I will share it. I think it appears in the book as well.
Wasn't it Libau?
Yes, that's right. That's right. It was in Libau in Latvia. That's where he joined. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But it's a bit unclear because Libau is in Latvia, as I understand it, and Reb Rabinovitz was a Lithuanian. So either Reb Rabinovitz was a Lithuanian living in Latvia, or he crossed the border to the town which was close in Lithuania, where he studied with Reb Rabinovitz. In the book, I have him leaving Latvia to go to Lithuania.
Who was the man that mostly influenced him?
Definitely.
Definitely.
It was definitely Rabinovitz, but I think he may have outgrown him, and
that's what I thought.
Yeah.
But how about in Leipzig? You're going to get to Leipzig right now. Okay.
Yeah, we're going to get to Leipzig now, and but in Leipzig he meets Hilalschneider, who was my great grandfather, and he had 10 children, and he was very influenced by him. And AZ got a job in another shul. Hilalschneider was the chief cantor in Leipzig, but there was a smaller shul where AZ Idelsohn got his first job as a permanent cantor. Okay, so many of the topics I'd learned about during my time with Reb Rabinovitz, Reb Eliyahu, and Yankel, but Hillel was much more learned and his position closer to my own. And AZ becomes interested in Zionism and was influenced by the writings of Achad Chaim. And this is also a key incident in the book. One day just before Purim, I came home from shul to great excitement in the house of Hillel and Esther. Esther was Hillel's wife. Hillel had just purchased a phonograph. A short while before, an American called Thomas Edison had figured out a way to record sound on tinfoil-coated cylinders and created a machine with 2 needles, one for recording and one for playback. When one spoke into the mouthpiece, sang or played some music, the sound vibrations were indented onto the cylinder by the recording needle. The possibilities this opened up were beyond words. My Nigun collection, as well as any other music, could be recorded. Late into the night, Esther, Hillel, and all his daughters and myself experimented with this new magical device. At first just talking, but then singing and recording song to the accompaniment of the piano. The cylinders were very delicate and we had to be extra careful not to damage them. I resolved to immediately start saving up for my own phonograph. In the next few days, we bought pre-recorded discs for the phonograph, beginning with the music of Salomon Sulzer, the legendary cousin Reb Rabinovitz had told me about. If not now, when? If not me, who? Destiny. In Leipzig, I continued at the Royal Conservatory of Music. 2 of my professors, both converted Jews, were the directors of the institution, Gustav Hollander and his brother Victor Hollander. Both of them tried to develop in me Germanic chauvinistic ideas. And when I shared my emerging idea of studying music with them, Jewish music with them, they told me there's no such thing as Jewish music. They were echoing what the well-known anti-Semite Wagner had said before them. This was an insult, but also a blessing. Like it says in the Talmud, if not now, when? If not me, who? When they said this, I decided there and then I would dedicate my life to the pursuit of Jewish music, whatever that might be, and wherever this might take me. So in answer to the earlier question, he did receive something of a classical training at this Royal Conservatory of Music in Leipzig. But before that, it had been very informal sort of apprenticeship where he learned from either just one or more than one teacher. So after spending some time in Germany, being head of, being the cousin in this synagogue in Leipzig, he becomes frustrated and he has become interested in Zionism, but he has an opportunity to come to South Africa where his parents are. And he sees this as just a detour, as a port of call on the way to Palestine. In South Africa, he befriends Walter, the African man who works in his mother's guest house, and he attends Walter's Zionist Christian church prayer and baptism ceremonies. So this is described in the book, and he's introduced to African music, also slightly fictionalized. He sheds his yarmulke. I remember the time in Latvia, I stood in front of the shop window full of books about the Jewish Enlightenment, seeing myself in the reflection of the glass as part of the picture, with my payot tucked behind my ears and my yarmulke off my head. I'd been looking into the future. My moment, I took my mother's pair of sewing scissors and standing in front of the mirror, I cut off my earlocks and trimmed my so that only a goatee remained. Much ceremony, I took my yarmulke off my head. So this is his kind of his movement into the Enlightenment and into Reform Judaism. Jerusalem. Soon after arriving in Jerusalem, I formed a mixed choir with some of my students and other singers. My new compositions, the old new songs, were not all that well received, and none of them actually became a hit or took root. This was very frustrating for me. It is one thing to compose dozens and dozens of songs, but my vision was to create an old new Jewish song for the new Jewish state. Melting pot. Beyond my dreams, Jerusalem at that time was a place of song. Literally from the streets, you could hear music wafting through the air. I had lost count of the synagogues that belonged to all of the tribes or ethnic communities of Israel, a microcosm of the ingathering of the exiles, all on my doorstep. These were not grand cathedral-like synagogues, but rooms in people's humble homes that they used for communal prayer. The various synagogues were conducted according to the customs of the respective countries, and their traditional song varied greatly from one another. I had not forgotten my phonograph, which had remained in its heavy wooden box in Johannesburg, and I started collecting their traditional songs. This was my method. I would record the synagogue music from each of the existing Jewish ethnic groups. For instance, the Yemenites, Babylonians, Persians, Elapatites, Dagestanis, Bukharan, Sephardim, Moroccans, the various Ashkenazim, and also the Hasidim. To get a full concept of Oriental music, I would also collect the non-Jewish music of the Arabs, the Turks, and the Persians. To make the population aware of my purpose and to stimulate their interest in helping this project succeed, I had posters printed announcing not only my own need, but explaining that in this process, the participants would be able to hear their own voices, singing the songs they loved. The announcements were also carried in the various German, Hebrew, and Yiddish papers available. I would not carry my heavy phonograph or ask to record songs on the Sabbath, as this would be forbidden. I would listen for music from the street, respectfully enter the house where the music was coming from, stay for the duration of the service, and then ask the religious leaders if I could come back with the heavy machine on my back to record them on another day that was not the Sabbath, or I would invite them to my house. So the book describes AZ doing ethnographic work with the Yemenites, with the Babylonians, with the Hasidim, with all the different Jewish tribes. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but here is a description of the Yemenite prayer meeting that he records. His vision of his Thesaurus, a vision was beginning to form in my mind, a collection of Jewish music in which all of the material that I would assemble, both the synagogal and the folkloristic material, I would set down in one composition that I would call the Thesaurus of Hebrew Oriental Melodies. At that time, I estimated I would need 10 volumes. The introductions to the volumes I would write in Hebrew and in German. In each volume, I would set down the history of the people in the lands they found themselves in, their customs, their pronunciation and use of Hebrew, and of course their song, which I would analyze. Nigun Hava. So I know that somebody in the chat said, what about Moshe Nathanson's claim to have an Aguila? And this is dealt with quite extensively in the book. Here he says, one day I discovered and recorded this Nigun from a Sadi Gora Chassid who told me his Rebbe Avraham Yaakov Friedman had composed the tune in the 18th century. The Sadi Gora Hasidic community traced their roots to the town of Sadi Gora in the Bukovina region of Habsburg, Austria. that is present-day Ukraine. The Nigun was rather slow, but it had a catchy melody with a bittersweet sentiment. So we come back to Havan Aguila, but the Song of Israel Institute, for a long time I held a vision of opening the music academy to Song of Israel, unite all Jews from cultures and nations as brothers and sisters. In 19, I founded the Makon Shirat Yisrael, the Song of Israel Institute. I intended to create from all of the different traditions of all the ethnic groups a unified version and to teach music and chazanut to Jerusalem yeshiva students. So here you see his very kind of pioneering zealot kind of spirit. Ye makers of pleasant song in Israel, wake to the voice calling from Zion. We hereby appeal to all Jewish musicians and singers in Jerusalem and in Israel, to the Sephardim and also to the Ashkenazim, Jews of Yemen, and likewise the Jews of Persia and Babylonia, and to all the Jewish musicians and cantors in the entire world. Who amongst you believes that his people's music is the echo of the people's soul? Who amongst you believes that the people's music is the echo of the song of Moses, the man of God, the Psalms of David, the king of Israel, and the chant of the Levites in the temple? For as much as our present-day generation does not possess such mighty men of spirit, nothing remains to us but our national song, the Song of Zion. Go ye and inquire into the first generation. Study the history of our people and note, was it not the Song of Israel that did wonders amongst our people, that roused our prophets, that inflamed our heroes, that lifted our sages? Ye Hebrew musicians, singers, cantors, and instrumentalists, you have the power to save us from complete assimilation. Come ye together in one place, unite into one great choir, and there will not be preferred the Ashkenazi Jew above the Persian, and the Sephardi above the Polish, and the Yemenites above the Babylonian. Put off the shell of the diaspora and the evil, impure spirit. Address your heart to the Song of Israel, whose echo still resounds in the air of the mountains that crown Jerusalem. So that you can get the sense of what kind of a person he was just from that. And he said this institute, its chief functions were to collect all the songs and folk melodies prevalent amongst our people in all the diverse communities of Israel and to gather them into one archive, to gather all the singers and cantors of these communities that be in Jerusalem and to set up special choirs to sing only their songs in the authentic spirit of the community, to foster the Song of Israel as a living old new song that goeth forth from Jerusalem, to present pageants based on Jewish history and Israel's great past accompanied by music, to assemble a treasury of musical instruments, ancient and contemporary, to assemble a treasury of song and music books. So Rabbi Cohen already touched on this, the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which was celebrating the end of the First World War. AZ and his choir were invited to perform, and he didn't know what song he would perform, but his mission was to create an old new song, and he researched, he found the song and he rescued it, he remembered it, and he performed it with his choir at this event at the Balfour, after the Balfour Declaration in Jerusalem. And but we do touch on the claim by Moshe Nathanson. He says, I then asked my choir of boys to help me set lyrics to the tune. One of my boys, Moshe Nathanson, and others made suggestions. I worked with these suggestions, coming up with a 4-part arrangement, changing the tempo of the Nigun. The result was Havan Aguila as we know it today. And the next part of the book deals with his time in America. He was really not finding life in Palestine very easy. He was still a preschool teacher. His great work was not really recognized. And he was invited, he went to Europe to have his Thesaurus published. And he was invited to America, where he had contact with the Cohen family. And I'd ask Rabbi Cohen if he wants to just jump in here and say a little bit about his time in America.
Thank you, Jonathan. Let me pick it up right where you left off. It starts in the year 1922. My father, Olav Sholem, was rabbi of a congregation in Chicago, and he went to New York for a convention. At that convention, AZ Idelsohn and other cantors sang at a big hotel there, and my father was impressed with him. He meets him after the concert and invites him to his synagogue and his home in Chicago. Well, Idelsohn went there. He got acquainted with my parents, and my mother, Allah Shalom, was already very much interested in Jewish music, and she even wrote a. Can you see this? She even wrote a book called Introduction to Jewish Music, which was published by the National Council of Jewish Women back in the early 20s. So she had some advanced knowledge that she was very anxious to supplement by learning from AZ. Well, he didn't stay in Chicago at that time. He went on a concert tour of the United States. About a year later, in 1923, my father was called back to Cincinnati to assume the chair of Jewish liturgy, Jewish theology. Jewish theology was his field in the rabbinical school. And when he got there, he saw the library and he saw a whole bunch of Jewish musical scores. It was called the Birnbaum Library. Nobody knew what to do with it. So he recommended Idelsohn to catalog that library. And sure enough, Idelsohn was arriving in Cincinnati. And there he cataloged the music and became professor of Jewish music and Jewish liturgy. That occasioned him to write textbooks. Here is his textbook on Jewish music in its historical perspective. And a couple of years later, Jewish liturgy. Jewish liturgy and its development. Now, of course, these textbooks are written in English, which was not AZ's native language, but my mother helped him with the language, and so he came out with a very literate text. So her fascination with music led her to be a great help to AZ. Now, of course, they both knew German. My mother had some German-speaking relatives, and Idelsohn spent a lot of time in Germany, so they had a common language that they could work with as he translated his thoughts into English. So the family friendship evolved then, and it included his wife, Sila, and their daughters, Shoshana, Dina, and Yiska, that Jonathan already mentioned. And over the years, thank God, I have stayed in touch with them. For one thing, we managed to put out a revised edition of his Jewish songbook. The Jewish songbook was originally published in 1929, and I had the honor of editing the third edition in 1950, and it became used in some 90 countries. Well, I started learning with him at age 5, and he was my first teacher of Jewish music of any kind. What happened was that he started by teaching me biblical cantillations, what we call trope. I'll always remember his opening line for one of the trope, the glowly munach. He said, "A munach has no personality." And anybody who knows trope will appreciate that, because the munach is a lowly little trope that takes on the first notes of whatever trope follows it. So he was very, and he was a colorful man. As a young boy, I was aware of an imposing man, heavy head, black Van Dyke beard, barrel chest, bearing himself with a kind of dignity that was of no specific country, but specifically Idelsohn. He could be stormy and impulsive. He could abandon himself to the pleasure of a fine spring day, or he could brood in volcanic rage. His offhand reaction to the American presidential campaign of 1932 was open disgust. He said, "Roosevelt slings mud and Hoover slings back the same mud. What else is new?" He was impatient with his students at the Hebrew Union College, declaring, "A boy without a book is no boy," and he would count them absent if they showed up without books. He got furious with those who would challenge his professional authority while lacking even a fraction of his qualifications. He worked tirelessly to finish a manuscript or a score, and yet found time and patience for a friend's young son. His own children were grown-ups to me. His youngest daughter, Yiska, was in high school, as was Dina, while the older children, were living far away in South Africa. Many years later, the South African government asked a grandson of his, an attorney named Joel Joffe, to leave the country because he defended Nelson Mandela in court. That grandson, knighted by the Queen, became a member of the House of Lords in London. But back in 1932, the Idelsohn apartment on Maple Avenue in the old Avondale section of Cincinnati was a scholar's workshop, where also a place where his wife Zilla could fashion gefilte fish for Shabbos. It was a warm and friendly relationship all through the years. And of course, I started learning from him, continued to learn from him until he moved to South Africa. I read from my book, and I could also refer my colleagues in the audience who are old enough to remember this to a biography that I published in the Cantor's Assembly Journal in 1981, just before the 100th anniversary of his birth. It was called A Century of Idelsohn. Well, considering the fact that he produced such amazing possibilities, made them real, and all that he achieved in a lifetime of only 56 years. He was really what we call a poseur in trop, the highest trop. And maybe a munach has no personality, but a poseur has great personality, and I'm fortunate to be a munach to such a great poseur. I would like to turn over again to my friend Jonathan. I think we're fortunate to have such a direct descendant of Avram Tzvi Idelsohn to share his knowledge with us today. Jonathan?
Thank you, Baruch. I'm almost done. It's very, very close to the end, in case some of you are becoming impatient. Let me just see. Sorry, I'm not finding that. Okay, so who can you hear me and see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so who composed and who can claim authorship of Haven Aguila? I know that's a big question for many people. So while Nathanson may have suggested either the Nigun or some words from poems as possible lyric, psalms as possible lyrics, he probably as a 12-year-old was not responsible for the four-piece arrangement. Reasons, and when one contextualizes the evolution of this tune within AZ's wider project and tremendous efforts in academic circles, AZ is recognized as the author of Haven Aguila, and Moshe Nathanson is credited as a contributor. The Sadigora Hasidim are also currently more strongly acknowledged. After all, it was their Nigun that set the foundations for the whole story. So the book does go into this in some more detail. Here's just some closing remarks from myself. Both Baruch and I thought that this would make a really interesting movie. There's just such a strong, so much powerful material for a soundtrack and visual material with the Shtetlach and Jerusalem at the turn of the century. And many of AZ's recordings survive to this day, so those could even be drawn upon. And I've already touched on the fact that this is a fictionalized account of his life and based on a 5-page autobiographical sketch, as well as memoirs of Yiska and Shoshana, his children. Yes, in our family, AZ had some bad press, and this was an effort of he was considered a womanizer and someone who neglected his family, but this was an effort on my part to honor him, and it was an amazing journey to actually do all this research and to learn so much about my great-grandfather, who I knew so little about. And I've already showed you my memory box. I won't say anything more about that. So that brings me to the end of this sort of presentation. So thank you very much. I'll stop screen sharing, and then I can see you all and you can see me again.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, it's really very special that we can have such a direct line and such both direct lines of somebody who worked with him, actually knew him, and somebody who is descended from him. So if there are people who'd like to talk, to ask questions or make comments, I can look on the board now. If you want to indicate, put your hand up or something, we'll be happy for you to unmute and say what you'd like to say. So I'm sure there are people who'd like to comment. Marsha, unmute.
Thank you very much, both of you, for an incredibly illuminating presentation. I really liked the balance of going back and forth as well between actually reading some of the text of your book, Jonathan, and Baruch, some of the anecdotes, as well as some of your own text. My first question is the 5-page autobiographical sketch published anywhere? I guess I would direct that to both of you, but probably Jonathan, you would know because you're the one who riffed off of it for your book.
Yes, Professor Sarusi from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, on their website, they have this published.
Okay, thank you for that. And also, yes, Baruch.
I could also refer you to the sketch that I published at the Cantor's Assembly Journal, 1981. It's called A Century of...
Yes, it's called A Century of. That's what I was alluding to before. Okay. And the other thing is just regarding this controversy about the lyrics, etc. Just wanted, in case some people didn't see my note about it, there is an article that was published in Tablet, which is a journal that you can just Google it, and that was published in September of 2019 by James Leffler and Edwin Cerruti, of whom you spoke before. And that article kind of goes through the entire controversy. And I think that what's so interesting about the article is not what words are written, but there is a photograph of the earliest manuscript that is known in Idelsohn's hand, and it's worth a look. So I would just suggest that. I'm sure, Jonathan, you probably know about the article, etc. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, who's next? Andreas. Unmute.
Yes, I am. I mean, thank you. Thank you. It was fascinating talks. Thank you very much. I wondered, is anything known about his career in the Ottoman army? Do we know anything about that time, about the repertoire of the band, about his function, which music he brought in, possibly how that all worked? It seems just such an incredible thing that for him to be like the conductor of the Ottoman army in Jerusalem. It would just be great to know something about it. Does anybody have any sources or anything about that time?
He was not in the Austrian army, he was in the Turkish army.
Ottoman, yes. I said
yeah.
Ottoman, I hope. Ottoman, Turkish, yeah. Turkish army in Jerusalem, yeah.
Yes.
I wonder, I know somebody called Sarah Aronson from South Africa. Do you know Sarah Aronson, Jonathan?
No.
No, I don't.
I have some recollection of her talking about somebody playing in the Ottoman band, and it could very well be Idelsohn. She had some music. I could find out. It could be another band leader in South Africa who also had these kind of roots, but I can try and find out from Sarah.
Yeah, I was going to say that the autobiographical sketch is quite interesting because it's actually not a single autobiographical sketch. AZ Idelsohn had written accounts of his life in English, in German, and in Hebrew. And Edwin Cerruti had done a fascinating presentation of all three accounts, and they differed. Sometimes they even contradicted each other, but he set them out in a table where there's a chronological account of his life, and there was definitely something in either all of them or some of them about his time as the band leader in Gaza in the Ottoman army.
Gaza.
So yeah, one can actually go to there for some more information. And then this book was a complete treasure trove. It's published. It's the Abraham Zvi Idelsohn Memorial Volume. I think Baruch mentioned it. And there's a sort of annotated bibliography of all of his work. And there's really a lot of detail. I'm not sure specifically on that, but it's likely that there is something about his time in the army.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex Knapp, would you like to say something? Unmute.
I have, I think, yes.
Good.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. I've always been a little bit mystified by the fact that in the first volume of the Thesaurus, devoted to Yemenite Jewish music, there is either no reference or hardly any reference to the use of organum, which is like parallel harmony in fourths, fifths, being used by the Yemenite Jews. It's a very, very unusual practice vocally. And so I'm just wondering why there are no examples of that in the Thesaurus, because it's one of the real sort of main extraordinary features about the Yemenite Jewish style. I know that they have organum among the Corfu Jews, and there are other groups as well, Samaritans, but I'm just wondering about the Yemenite Jews, because Idelsohn actually devoted his whole first volume to the music of the Yemenite Jews, but without any reference to organum.
Sorry, I've no idea. I'm not very musical. That's a bit beyond me.
I wonder if anybody who'd like to.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have an answer for you either.
Okay.
Anybody else like to comment on this aspect? Okay.
Okay.
So, who else would like to? Malcolm Miller? Was that you putting your hand up?
It's fascinating. I know that I think I've heard Alex, you talking about the sort of polyphony of the Yemenite community. So that's a really interesting question. I mean, maybe perhaps he didn't hear that particular music at that time. I don't know whether in what sense it was a sort of systematic or comprehensive type of project. I actually wanted to ask also about the connection with the Vienna Academy of Arts. At what point and how did he have that sort of connection? If at the point he was wanting to get support for his project, and did anything have anything to do with the Ottoman, with the Turkish connection, perhaps, or something? I don't know. That somebody must know more about that aspect. And I did actually have a question for Dr. Morgan. Yeah, I'd love to get hold of your book. That really interesting. And I just wondered if you could say something about did you know your grandmother and great aunt, who were the daughters and of Idelsohn, and do you have any personal oral memories of discussing him, let's say, in the family as a sort of a real presence? In what sense do you have your personal memories of Idelsohn in your upbringing, in your childhood?
I mean, as you probably know, I never met AZ because he died before I was born. But his children, his daughters, Dina was my grandmother, who had the least to say about her father, which was quite ironic. And the other daughters, Shoshana and Yiska, I knew both of them very well. And Yiska was involved in a sort of oral history project where we recorded for several days. She spoke into a cassette tape recorder, and she told stories about the family, principally about AZ Idelsohn. And these were actually published, and I drew a lot on them for my book. And a cousin of mine, his name is John Seligman. He has a website with the family history, and I'd actually written up those interviews with Yiska Schmarman, that's the daughter of AZ, into a kind of book, an account. And so that is available. And if you struggle to find it on the Seligman website, I can email it to Geraldine, and I'll do that with pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
And now I can distribute all these connections, and we'll put them in the summary that goes with the recording. Lovely to see Judith Frugesi with us. Lovely to see you. If you'd like to make any comments, you're most welcome to unmute.
Geraldine?
No. Yes.
I just enjoyed Jonathan's, his memories of his grandmother and her sister. When I knew them, they were teenagers, and Yiska was really a sweet girl. She was much older than I was. I was not interested in her, romantically. I wasn't old enough for that, but I remember her personality, and her mother, Tzila, was Idelsohn's wife, and Tzila was a COZ's daughter, and Idelsohn gave his wife credit for composing quite a few melodies that he used. So music was really in the foundations of their whole family.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sure Sarah Aronson mentioned the name of Yiska So,
I had a response to the earlier question when I thought about it, the one about the Yemenite Jews and how a very key feature of their music was not touched upon by AZ Idelsohn. And his methodology was that he was working with people in Jerusalem. As far as I know, he never went to Yemen. And the sample of people he worked with may have been sort of, idiosyncratic, or in some ways weren't completely typical of what one would expect. So yeah, that's just something that I thought about.
thank you. Would you like to say something?
Thank you very much. This was very interesting. I don't know, I have many questions, but they are really musical questions about, like the one Alex asked, but a lot of things I cannot make sense out of that Idelsohn wrote. But these are very specific musical questions, so I don't think they really are relevant at this point. Also, I'm sorry not being more active, but I still cannot sit, so I'm standing. Standing, and since I have to teach over 12 frontal classes every week, without being able to even to stand, I just couldn't add anything more to that. But I'm very glad to be here.
Lovely to see you. That's good that you're with us today. Who else would like to make a comment or say something? See, we've got Winston Churchill with us. I wonder if he'd like to say something. His picture is there. So this is really a fascinating insight. So we really want to thank you very, very much. Let me just say that the International Forum for Jewish Music Studies is inviting other organizations or groups like the American Society for Jewish Music and special interest groups to join us. We have a website on Humanities Commons where you can register, and you can register individually or register your group or together. The main beauty of doing that is that this is a platform where scholars, musicians, composers can interact. So, our main aim is to connect people. And I will try and put in the chat, or I'll email to you again. In fact, every time I email you, there is the place at Humanities Commons where you can join the International Forum. And the International, it's not another organization. What it is a way of connecting you. And, I'm so glad to see that many people are really responding to this connection. And we have 20 or 25 people who are regularly with us and have formed, as Alex has said, a community. And, often you would meet at a conference somewhere, and then maybe in 6 or 8 months' time, you'd meet other people at a different conference. And here is the opportunity to meet with whoever you want to meet with on a weekly basis. So I'd like to tell you what's coming next. Next week, we have, let me just pull up my nice picture. Next week, on the 9th of February, we've got Professor Mark Slobin, who is talking to Joshua Waletsky. Slobin is the Professor Emeritus at Wesleyan University, and a very well-known ethnomusicologist and author. He's talking to filmmaker, singer, and composer Josh Wodetsky, and they're taking a fresh look at Yiddish folk song, and they discuss issues arising from the new project, which you may have seen, yiddishfolksong.com, an analytical website and other new creative work around Yiddish song. And immediately after that, the following week, we're looking at Judeo-Spanish song, from field recordings to professional ensembles. And there we have Dr. Isabel Gans, who was a pioneer and brought out the first LPs with her wonderful ensemble she put up in America called Alhambra. And Dr. Susanna Weich-Schachak is going to talk about her field work. So then we're going to talk about, with Yehoash Hirschberg and Irit Youngerman, Hanoch Jacobi's Mutatio, or the negation of exile in Israel's formative years. So it's about the early classical music in Israel. But if you want to know, on Humanities Commons, there is a full list, and do get in touch with me or preferably registered Humanities Commons to know more. So I want again to ask if anybody's got any questions about any part of the International Forum, if you'd like to talk about that at all. And if you're all happy with that, then I'm going to again say, so Jonathan, how do we get your book? Is it available on Amazon?
It's available on Amazon, yes. If you just type in Nigun, I published it under my ancestral name was Magun before my grandfather changed it to Morgan. So because it's such a strong Jewish theme, I decided to use the pen name of Jonathan Magun, M-A-G-U-N. Yeah, it is available on Kindle Amazon.
Okay. And Baruch, you've got so many wonderful books, which I'm sure we can also find.
They're on Amazon, both this one and my new one, which is called Learning Torah All Over Again.
Now, what do you mean by that?
Read the book and you'll find out.
Okay, good.
I want to thank you and Mark for inviting Jonathan and myself to be with you today. And I think if we accomplished anything, we may have convinced a few people that we are all successors of Abraham Tzvi Idelsohn.
I think
thank you all.
That's very true, a really key person. So it's been a real privilege to hear people with such direct connections to him to give us this presentation, which will be available on YouTube. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you all next week. So